Hello, all my viewers. Welcome to this Sunday edition of the Weekly Word. The title of the message for this week is called Fireproof Faith, and I'm still in the book of Daniel. So if you have your Bible ready, let's read together Daniel chapter 3. We're going to read the entire chapter. Daniel chapter 3. And I'm reading from the CSB, Christian Standard Bible. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the prefects, the governors, basically all of these government officials and the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue. Then they all stood before the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of all these musical instruments and every kind of music there available, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had built. Some Chaldeans, which Chaldeans are some of the local upstanding people, like the higher ruling class in that area. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all of these musical instruments and every kind of music available must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing fiery furnace." Now there are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, which are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king, and they do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you had built. So then in a furious rage, King Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar asked them personally, "Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold statue that I have set up and built? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of all these musical instruments, will you fall down and worship the statue that I have made? But if you don't worship it, I will immediately throw you. You will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that can rescue you from my power?" So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied back to the king, "Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of the blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king of Babylon. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you, as king, to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up and built." Then King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage after hearing this, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. King Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than what was customary, 7 times more than what was necessary. And then he commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up the 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them personally into the fiery furnace, into the blazing furnace of fire. So those men in their trousers, robes, and head coverings and other clothes were tied up. The three friends were tied up and thrown head first into the furnace of blazing fire. But since King Nebuchadnezzar's command was so urgent and so fervent, and the furnace was extremely hot, the raging flames were so high that they actually killed the keepers that threw the three friends into the fire. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, Didn't we only throw three men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied back to the king. He exclaimed, Look, I see four men not tied. I see four men walking around in the fire unharmed. And the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Looks like an angel. Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the fiery furnace and called out, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fiery furnace. When the prefects, governors, and all the king's advisors gathered around, after they saw this, they saw that the 7 times blazing fire had no effect on the bodies of these three men. Not a hair of their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of burnt fire on them. Then King Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue today a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb and his house made into a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Thank you, Lord God, for your word. Last Sunday in Daniel chapter 1, I gave you a short introduction into the book of Daniel and to the life of Daniel himself. And I also briefly mentioned his three closest Jewish friends and captives, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, Daniel chapter 3 focuses solely on these three young Jewish men. Now, for some reason in the text, Daniel was not a part of this event. He was not a part of this, what took place here in the text. And my research, and I've looked it up, and I haven't found where he actually was. Probably somewhere doing other duties in the province of Babylon. But I'd like just to give you a short narrative of actually what happened here. You have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were pretty much appointed. They were friends of Daniel, and they were appointed governors, high-ranking officials within the nation of Babylon. They were so trusted by King Nebuchadnezzar that they were held esteemed above the other captives in Babylon during that time when they were taken from Judea. King Nebuchadnezzar was so full of himself that he had a statue of either built of himself or of one of their gods that was 90 feet high and 90 feet wide. The biblical text I looked into said the statue was made of possibly wood and covered in gold. Now, but this thing was such a sight to behold that King Nebuchadnezzar called all the government officials and everybody around within the king of Babylon to come and to see the opening of this event. Basically like a ribbon cutting ceremony. Now, Nebuchadnezzar ordered everybody around to bow down and worship, to get on their face and their knees to worship this statue. That's how full and so puffed up King Nebuchadnezzar was. Not only did he want to be the political main person, the main political figure in Babylon, but he also declared himself a religious figure. The top religious basically declared himself a god. Now, everyone in attendance dropped down to their knees and worshiped the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar made. But three individuals, as we read in the text, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, said, no, we're not going to worship your God. They stood firm, and they stood up, and they told Nebuchadnezzar, no, I'm not going to worship your God, not going to worship you. We only have one God, and that's our God in heaven, the God of the Jews. We only worship him, and we only pay homage to him. Well, this infuriated King Nebuchadnezzar. So he had a fiery furnace. The text says in that it was like a kiln. Probably, I don't know if they used this giant furnace to make pottery. But normally, it was supposed to be at a certain temperature. Well, since Nebuchadnezzar was so angry and so mad, he was filled with rage. He told his people to turn the heat up 7 times more than what it was supposed to be. I can't even imagine what the temperature would have been. Maybe several thousand degrees. I don't know. But it was so bad that when they threw the 3 men in, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his soldiers tied him up and threw the 3 men into the furnace. His own men died because the flames were coming out of the furnace. It was that hot. Well, throughout this whole thing, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego should have burned up in the fire, easily incinerated. But because of their faith in God, because they stood up for God and they refused to bow down and worship King Nebuchadnezzar and to, rejected this false idol. Not only were there 3 men inside, not only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but there was also a fourth person that could be seen inside the furnace. Now, the text, some people say, it was an angel. It was a divine protector. But also in the text preparing for this message, I also read that this possibly could have been Christ himself, the pre-incarnate image of Christ, or the pre-incarnate Christ before he was born in Bethlehem in the beginning of the New Testament. But anyway, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were actually seen walking around. They were unharmed. They were talking with this fourth individual, this fourth heavenly being or angel or pre-incarnate Christ in the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar was so amazed, even with him being so puffed up. He was so amazed and so intrigued by this and so blown away that even he rejected his own idol. He rejected his own statue of gold that built in the image of himself that he forced all of his people to worship. He was so moved by this and saw that there was a heavenly being that he called for the 3 to come out. Even though the soldiers and everything were laying dead that had been burned up, he called the 3 to come out. And he basically made a decree saying, my God, your God is more powerful than my God. So it made a decree to worship the God of Israel. How amazing is that? It even humbled King Nebuchadnezzar seeing this event. Now, he forced all of the people, Nebuchadnezzar forced everyone in the kingdom to worship the new God, the God of Israel. That's faith right there. And I know that what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to actually endure in order for their faith to be tested was on the very end of the spectrum. They were thrown into that fiery furnace. It was on the very end of the spectrum. And I mean, the actual chances of us today of literally being cooked alive in something like that is almost nil. It is almost not heard of. So how does Daniel, what we just read and studied together in Daniel chapter 3, how does that faith, the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how does it apply to us today? Now, everyone on this earth, every one of us, we face our own fires in everyday life. You know, this could be any type of addiction. It could be any type of sin. It could be stress. It could be criticism. It could be any kind of trial or tribulation. It could be uncertainty. It could be fears. And many, many others, I'm sure, in this list that there's just too numerous. But every one of us faces fires in our everyday life. You see, the world around us is constantly putting pressure on us to compromise our Christian faith, moral values, and our personal beliefs. But having uncompromising and unwavering faith means standing firm for God and standing firm on godly principles. It also means trusting God with the outcome and believing that He is with us in every one of our life's trials. So my viewers watching this, I'd like to close with this. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when the outside world tells us when to and how to bow down, when we should and when we need to give in, our unwavering faith in God tells us to stand firm, to stand rock solid, even when we have to stand in the middle of the blazing fire. You know, sometimes God may not always keep us out of the fire, out of life's fires, but God does promise us that He will always stand with us in the middle of our life's blazing infernos. God will be there to protect us and to see us all the way through to when the next one flares up. Thank you for joining me for this message for Fireproof Faith. I hope this message has spoke to your heart. I hope the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego has it'll help make your faith stronger. Guys, you guys have a great week. I will prepare next for the short Wednesday word to get you through the next week. And I will see every one of y'all next Sunday, and may God be with you and keep you safe this week. God bless.